there. Thank you for alerting me to the shoe store.
Sometimes.
It's very.
6, 7.
Let me ask them something.
The start. But so there would be 6 pay raises.
I could do a quarter.
That's every year they go
I think Tom got his second year.
$36 a week. Is that 312?
A couple more.
I need one on the.
So you're paying OT for those calls.
That would be good. Yeah. All right, I'll sit here while you choose.
Say everything we said there. It's up to you.
And you're paying overtime for vacation. Sick time. And you're doing it with your beforehand. Oh, I get it. I get it.
I say that.
Right.
You can't buy.
Oh, yeah, yeah. The benefits that are attached to the tax adjustment, that's fine.
There he is. How are you servicing his seats?
The benefits are high now. You got lost.
Yeah.
38. Nice to meet you. On the permanent part.
Yeah. Organization's ready? I don't have that left.
I love it.
So yeah, I never got it.
Sit down and enjoy.
Once they figure that out.
You know this pocket like that? I did this course one time. I was looking at the last one right about the hospital. And the nurse started doing IV. And she's like, why did you start at 14? She said, being I would stop and crash. Not even thinking. She was making me call the room. I don't know. Absolutely. Like, they started graduating with 4 arthroscopic contractions. I'm thinking, how big can I get?
I like everything. I like being on the job.
Part of the fan.
Because I like that.
Yeah.
Fans were,
Yes.
How are you?
Yeah.
That's your comment already.
What years were you guys talking about?
Bill, when you're ready.
Approve the old minutes, yeah.
All right, we're going to call to order at 10:40. Dr. Fisher in the excused absence of Dr. Leinhardt.
Everybody get a chance to look at the minutes? Have to approve the minutes.
All right, the
Second.
Sure. The first on the agenda, the Jefferson Rescue Squad has submitted their approved controlled substance operational plan to us. This is purely informational since the REMAC is not a formally approved controlled substance operational plan, but just to let everybody know that it is in place. An updated list of AAREMS controlled substance agencies were presented to the Department of Health on July 28th. Mary Ramo had sent me an email, and I checked our records and sent her an email back with a couple of slight revisions of it. And I don't know if Mary has any comment about that right now. We still have some agents, some ALS agencies in the region that do not have controlled substance plans applied for, I believe.
That is correct. I do know some are working towards it, and others I've heard are going to be dropping down the level.
Okay. I have not heard anything further after my conversation, my email conversations with you on the 28th about that. We received a letter on September 2nd from an ALS first responder agency stating that they wanted to be exempt from controlled substance licensing and wondered if they could drop down from paramedic to AEMT level for that purpose. And I spoke with Joe Farrell about that. I'm going to ask him to comment about it.
The discussion we had in the Bureau is, if you look at the public health law, it says an AEMT agency could be considered an ALS agency. However, it's up to the regional council to determine whether or not an ALS agency, all ALS agencies have to be able to provide controlled substances. Since only a CC or a paramedic can provide controlled substances, where does that leave the AEMT as far as being an advanced agency? We're talking about an ALSFR. They can't drop down to AEMT and still be considered an ALSFR. That's basically what the discussion is at this point in the Bureau. We're waiting to talk to Lee about it and see what she says, but my feeling is that she's not going to allow an AEMT to be considered an ALSFR.
So that's still a work in progress.
It's still a work in progress for another couple of days.
That was also a discussion at CMAP as well. They're putting that back to the physicians to answer that question as well.
The question was raised and then realized they had to address it.
Historically, were intermediates allowed to do that?
I'm sorry, what?
Historically, were intermediates allowed to be ALS FRs?
I'm not aware what we...
Here's where the question is coming, and I can tell you because I've answered it a lot in the North Country. With the AEMT level, AEMTs can now push drugs. They can bill as ALS agencies now. So the correlation, it makes sense to ask the question. Previously, intermediates could not push drugs. That's where the difference is.
So why is there such a concern about them not being able to qualify as an ALS provider simply because they're not going to be using narcotics?
A lot of counties are raising the question, you know, can they cancel ALS if they have an ALSFR at the AEMT level? That's where the question is coming from.
The new regulations also require any ALS agency, what's considered ALS, to have a narcotics license. So that's where the whole thing stems, is an AEMT agency, an agency that drops from a true paramedic critical care level agency down to an AEMT level. what classification are they considered in regards to the way the law is written for controlled substances.
But is it otherwise true that an AEMT can do just about everything else that
It is not.
okay, so then if that was the one difference, I hate for that to be the difference, why another ALS rig is going to show up on the scene simply because one can't provide narcotics. But otherwise, if there are other differences, then it makes sense.
All right. We have a written request from Springfield first responders, ALS first responders for BLS Narcan use, and therefore I'm asking the REMAC physicians to consider their approval for that use. The paperwork is properly submitted and fully filled out and signed by their agency medical director.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, we'll approve it.
The Schoharie County Critical Care Team is seeking confirmation of their new agency medical director, Dr. Joseph Luz. Dr. Luz is also an agency medical director for several other agencies in the region and has a very positive track record in that regard and has filled out the appropriate paperwork, so I'm presenting that to the REMAC physicians for their confirmation.
It's fine, it doesn't turn. Okay, next.
Now we have an interesting, the next one is an interesting email was received by us from the Department of Health, from Andy Johnson of the Department of Health on September 2nd, saying that the use of on-site scoring results were not permitted for tech credentialing. And Tom, I believe, has an update on that.
So I brought this to Phil we had 4 of our EMTs get credentialed or get test out at a paramedic level. I wanted to get them online, get them to start practicing, at least get them into their internship phase with us. And this region says we can't do that. And I said, well, why not? And needless to say, there were several different answers that I received. So I had a meeting with Dan Clayton, posed this to Dan even the other day at State Council. He says, absolutely, it's a certification, you should be able to use it. Andy Johnson has a different opinion. So now I have 2 deputy directors that are not in agreement, so I went directly to Lee. And I said, Lee, what is the answer? And she says, it's absolutely a state certification card. Why else would the state do it and take their money? So Andy Johnson and Andy says, that says right on there that it's only for scoring purposes, blah, 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 blah. So I scanned, or I had Jill scan me a copy of the card that they received, and it clearly states in all capital letters in the center, this report serves as your temporary official paramedic certification card and will expire in 60 days. It says right on that paper. So Lee, and I am getting this in writing, is under the understanding that this is a valid card for 60 days. I further pose the question is, if a nobody takes an EMT test and passes, do we let them practice as an EMT? And Andy says, well, yes, you can do that. So I don't see how it can be valid for an EMT, but not for a paramedic. So he said, and I asked that question. He says, well, that's because a paramedic is doing advanced skills. And I said, well, wait a minute. EMTs are defibrillating. They're in the check and inject program. They're doing albuterol. They're doing CPAP. They're doing skills that require supervision. He didn't have a response to that, quite honestly. So that's the reason why I went to Lee. Now, I am getting it in writing, but Lee clearly told me, as far as she's concerned, it states that this is your official paramedic card for 60 days. So I would like to move that this region accepts this as a valid card. And furthermore, Lee also stated, we're all worried about errors. And this region did have an error. I had that paramedic that worked for me. He took an on-site test. He failed it. On-site scoring was, gave him a paramedic card. He practiced for 5 weeks until the state caught it, and then they said, no, wait a minute, you failed the exam. There is the same likelihood, whether it's on-site or whether it's a regular exam, that that can happen. We should not punish, especially now with the shortage of providers, and paramedics in particular, we should not hold one incident that happened against all of the agencies. Correct, that happened 10 years ago. The state of New York has to have quality measures built into these exams and into these contracts. So the same thing can happen in a regular written exam as it does in an on-site exam.
I would support your motion.
Could I make a friendly amendment to Tom's motion that we adopt this pending receipt of the something in writing from Lee? Because obviously we have I have something in writing from Andy Johnson which says, no, don't do it. And this is rather an unprecedented situation, as Tom just said, where we have a deputy disagreeing with the boss, so and disagreeing in writing. So
This is the only region that delays putting anyone online for ALS to await the listing in the healthcare provider's website or the arrival of the card.
Right.
For a while, we did accept it, right?
We did.
Like, we change every 3 years. It's like we do, we don't, we do.
Sounds like it's because we have something in writing from somebody at the department.
Yeah,
that
well,
says
you
we
see,
can't.
with the reason
So
we did
need
it,
something that
the
trumps
REMAC
it.
adopted the policy of allowing it based on on-site scoring until we had the ability to go into the official state database. We now have the ability to go into the official state database and see whether they're still basic or advanced. And that's when we stopped and said, well, we can't do it if the state says they're still, if the state says they're basic. And now we have this in writing from Andy Johnson that says you can't use on-site scoring. So obviously something in writing from Lee will trump the writing from Andy Johnson.
Yeah.
So I would just say that we adopt that policy. I'm wholeheartedly, and believe me, I'm wholeheartedly in favor of putting our paramedics online just as quick as we can get them online.
Actually, the second part of that is we are the only region that also doesn't require a medical director, an agency medical director, to approve who they're putting out. That's a problem. I've seen it personally, that without having a medical director sign off on who's working under their license can be bad for an organization. I think that agencies certainly they have the duty to protect their medical director, but I think that this region, no different than every other region, should require the medical director's signature on the tech form application.
I believe the medical director has to sign them off on a form when they go into school.
No,
No?
no.
That,
The application for Hudson Valley, at least through last year, did have a section for the medical director, not so much as permission, but simply as one more level of advisement for the student to understand what they were getting into when they went to school. So that was included on Hudson Valley's application for paramedic program.
Howard, is that included in SUNY Covington?
Yeah.
Again, it wasn't a permission, but it was
Even
one more
so,
level of consultation.
Honestly, it just doesn't apply either way, because going into school doesn't mean that you're practicing under that medical director's license anyhow. It sounds like Hudson Valley was using it as a resource to the student. You're talking about an employee later under a completely different medical director. Or the same medical director and just under a different situation.
I can tell you, being part of the credentialing program in the Remo region with Mohawk, every single one of our ALS providers had to go and sit and meet the medical director before they were credentialed. They had to go and physically sit down, have a little chat with the medical director, because that's what we wanted.
But online, the paramedic or tech couldn't get credentials without the medical director going into the REMO website and actually clicking the final approval. So it was the medical director who put the paramedic online
The other thing,
electronically.
as long as we're talking about it, the other thing that Remo did a few years ago was put the onus on the agency's medical directors to put people online and their LS coordinators, not the region. The region was the process and the gatekeeper, but it was the individual
Yeah, that's what we did.
agencies that were
We
responsible.
felt strongly about that.
We can easily amend or slightly revise our tech application to include a signature from the agency medical director. That's not a problem at all. We can easily do that.
I wasn't aware that it didn't exist, so I would definitely recommend that.
Could you make that in form of a motion?
Sure.
Okay. Motion made that the agency medical director be required to sign the tech application for on-site scoring, for got that on the brain, for online credentialing of a tech applicant. Do I have a second on the motion?
Does one need to be filled out if a person belongs to multiple agencies with multiple medical directors?
Yes.
So each,
If you're
Well,
gonna,
the-
you're gonna be working under my license, I need to know that.
right,
Whether I'm your primary agency
So it's
or
not
your,
just-
you know, 15th
so
agency.
for each agency
For
they
each
belong
agency,
to.
but that's good, that's a good point.
So-
Specification that the agency medical director for each agency of employment should be required to sign off on that, yes.
So probably the wording around the tech applications on the application itself needs to reflect that.
We can easily do that, no problem.
So you'll have to submit a new form for every agency that they work for? So get credentialed at each, because you get one number, so.
You get one
it doesn't
number,
matter-
that-
Doesn't matter where I'm working that particular day.
I think
It's
that
the
will
same
alleviate
number.
some of the other issues that we had been faced with in the past, is a medical director puts somebody offline for whoever, ABC ambulance, and now all of a sudden they decide to go to XYZ ambulance and apply for a job, they get hired, maybe the same region, maybe that medical director doesn't know that that person was pulled offline. So by submitting that form
So
to
we-
fill,
So we submit that form, but they don't take the test.
no, they don't, they're already issued, if they're online, they're online, but I think that the region should certainly keep track of who.
In the Remo region, there's a primary agency and a secondary, and the primary agency is the one that's responsible to keep track of all of the CMEs and re-credentialing and all of that. So there was a way to distinguish.
We can easily amend the form to become an acknowledgement of secondary agency medical director, or whatever. We can work that out very easily.
We had talked about adopting that standard when we talked about putting the new requirements in. And I had gotten the form from Remo, sent it on to you that shows, that had a check mark, you know, this is your primary agency or this is your secondary agency and you've taken ACLS, and it was kind of their electronic end of year checkoff.
So now if you take a test online, you become paramedic, you have one agency you work for, you have to have that agency's medical director sign. Then you can start working for them. A month later, you go and find a part-time job in another agency, and you have to get their medical director's signature and submit it to the region.
Absolutely.
And then,
Phil, if I may, I hate to say this, I'm going to throw them under the bus and I'm surrounded by them, but Dean and Deb are the ones that handle Remo's credentialing, which is what everyone keeps referring to. Why not let the horse speak as opposed to everyone's interpretation?
Thanks so much.
Well, I could have,
Okay, so
sorry, Dean.
No, that's
but-
fine. So the issue is that regardless of the structure of the system, the medic who's working is working under somebody's license. And that license needs to be protected one way or another. Someone has to take responsibility, and that medical director takes responsibility of everything that person does under their license. So if I work for, to use easy, if I'm working for GAVAC and I'm under GAVAC's medical director, but if I happen to get a part-time job in Fulton County, well, when I'm up there, I'm under their medical director. So if I thoroughly screw up there and have a bad outcome, GAVAC's medical director deserves to know that they have a rogue medic. And there needs to be a conversation between the medical director. It doesn't need to include anybody else, but the medical directors have to make a decision. Is this person, should they continue to be practicing? Is there an education component? Does something need to happen before we let them continue to practice? Because there's multiple medical directors' licenses at stake here. So that's the worst case scenario, okay? So looking at that worst case scenario, Remo developed a system that
you know, you work under individual medical director's license, and so who's the gatekeeper? Well, the region's the gatekeeper. If I'm online at GAVAC and then I go work at Fulton County, you know what I mean? So who knows where I'm working? The only person who really knows is the regional office, because they have a form that says I'm at GAVAC and GAVAC's medical director approves, and they have a form that says I'm at Fulton County, and Fulton County's medical director knows that's me. It knows,
Time's up.
knows that I'm working there. So that is the whole, the idea of the system, is that there's a gatekeeper and someone to facilitate at least the conversation. The conversation may be, I disagree, let him continue to work. That's fine. The medical director got to make the decision, not, because it's their license.
If I can add to that, just a word of caution about sharing employment information back and forth. We had a case in Remo maybe 10 years ago now, where a paramedic was taken offline by one agency's medical director, and it was a part-time agency, and it affected his primary employment because they decided to share that information, and that paramedic came very close to actually filing a lawsuit against the region because it impeded his ability to work. And fortunately,
It should have.
unless, look, we all know this, unless it was unsubstantiated. And if somebody is investigating something and nothing's been proven, you know, the issue is, are they eligible to go online in a region? If a region's going to take action on a paramedic, so be it. But if Debbie's my medical director and I do something which would never happen, and I do something that she doesn't like,
She would
yet
never
I'm
put you
also,
online under her?
right, and yet I'm also working for Dr. Fisher, she may have it in for me and decide that, you know, she didn't like what I did, even though I provided good medicine. The next thing you know is I'm offline in the region and Dr. Fisher can't employ me either. So it gets, I'm just saying, just be careful about it.
That's why the medical director gets to make the decision. The individual medical director gets to make the final decision.
I'm just saying, sharing information about
outside
employees.
of the regional format.
Correct.
So
Sharing
if I take you offline, and I think it's an issue that other medical directors need to know about, I can't go to Dr. Fisher. I bring it here.
Correct.
And we address it in the
Correct.
executive session, and the other medical directors need to hear the
Right.
outcome of this group.
Right, and
if
the
this group
outcome
says
is,
your issue,
right,
then that's a different story. If
Right.
they say this is a problem, then everybody gets to know, and the region can take the person offline.
It's not how you
I think
explain
that
it,
needs to
Dean.
happen.
correct.
That doesn't, there's no way for that to happen now.
Right, right.
Is that how you explained it, Dean?
It is.
Does it go to the region? Or the
It does.
REMAC
So there's a
first?
problem, and an agency wants to take somebody offline. There is no taking them offline. It's taking them offline with your agency. It comes to the region. We look at the merits. We forward it to the chair of the medical advisory, and then based on that conversation, it goes to the whole group of physicians and is discussed in an executive session, or it is not. But it goes. There's more steps. It's not like we're going to get together and convince about this guy. It's not that at all. It's a formal process. It's documented to the point where it's supposed to be, and there, you know, and it's decided upon.
The only other question I would have was what about region to region? Is there any communication set there? Because
There is. So if I want to go online in AAREMS, my home region, which is Remo, has to send a letter, but there has to be communication between the regions saying that I'm online there and there's no current QI issues, known QI issues.
That's a system that's very actively in place in our region right now. We
However,
can't-
it doesn't say, so you're online in both regions, you had QI issues in Remo. Remo doesn't necessarily communicate
Once
to
you're
AAREMS
online.
once you're online, that
That's
there were
correct.
QI issues.
That is correct. It is very possible, and very, I won't say easy, but very possible for something to fall through the cracks.
Imagine if we had state licensure.
I'd imagine that there's things have fallen through the cracks, just thinking over the years of things that happened, but I think that's probably the next step, is to be able to have that back and forth communication between the regions. You know what I mean? So I know the providers are online in this region. Well, I should be able to have access to where else they're online. So at least that, you know, so at least there can be communication between the regions.
And I think eventually that
That's the
should
next
happen,
step.
certainly with the collaborative protocols. Now we have, what, 7 regions under one set of protocols in, well, 11. There should be that.
There is a format, or something in place, if there's behavior that is so egregious that an entire region agrees that a paramedic needs to not practice, it should go to the Department of Health for further investigation. So if this region thinks that somebody shouldn't practice in this region, we should feel strongly enough that they shouldn't practice anywhere, and we should report it to the department, and they do their investigation, and then they can choose whether they believe that the provider is okay to continue to practice in the state. So that exists.
And that does go on too, because I mean, there are times we take our complaint and I'll call Joe and I'm like, here are the merits, here are the things, do I forward this or do I not? And there's a decision-making process at the state that they help, you know, they make the decision and send it back to me what to do next.
But there's also a policy in place to prevent what Howard says happens, that so Deb doesn't like Howard and she thinks he's being targeted by her. There's actually a remediation process for medical directors to follow. So all these what ifs, a lot of them are already covered by policy and precedent.
Dean, in Remo, if someone gets credentialed to work in agency A and they decide to work part-time in agency B, do they have to notify anybody at the Remo office that they're going to another agency?
Yes.
Yes, they do. And it's the obligation of the agency. So I want to go to work for Tom. Tom has me fill out, it's a abbreviated credentialing process. I don't have to do all the calls, I don't have to take another protocol test or all those other things, but there's a form. He needs information about me, he needs copies of my cards, and he needs a document that says that the medical director for that agency is approving me to work under the license, and that goes to the region.
Okay.
So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. You have a form already in place.
Yeah, it's all electronic now, yeah. Mostly.
Okay. Let me, if this is agreeable to the membership, let me chat with Dean about this and work up a form. It sounds like in addition to our tech application, which will now include the medical director's signature, it sounds like we need to have some sort of little tech application for a secondary agency. Let me chat with Dean. Probably can chat with Dean over lunch. That's agreeable to everybody, and we can work up a form which I'll send around by way of a sample to everybody to take a look at for your input and suggestions. I'll send it around to the physicians and to all our members, and for your feedback, and then we can adopt it. How's that sound? Sound good?
So we still have a motion on the table.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry. Could you restate it again?
That was the one about adding the medical director's signature to the form. You have two motions on the table.
One was using the cards.
One was using the cards, and the second one. So I'll amend my, let's go back to the beginning. I'll amend my first resolution. That be approved using the temporary EMT and paramedic cards for credentialing purposes pending Lee's communication.
Okay.
Second.
Is that technically this is a REMAC meeting, so is that agreeable to the REMAC position?
Yes.
Okay. Ooh.
And then the second one was adding the medical director's signature to the tech credentialing, to the original tech credentialing form, and looking at the creation of agency, your second agency's abbreviated tech credentialing.
Is that agreeable to the REMAC position?
Yes.
Both approved. See, during the REMAC meetings, only the REMAC positions are voting members. In case somebody here doesn't understand that process. Okay, next item, update on the status of the AAREMS BLSFR agency recertifications. Joe Carroll will give us a quick update on how are the BLSFR agency recertifications?
In this region, they're just not all caught up.
Are they all caught up?
There's only one or two, and I have partial paperwork, I'm just waiting for the rest.
Okay, so there hasn't really been any dialogue. Good. Again from Joe, if I may, update on agency compliance with DOH recertification and/or inspection requests.
Inspection requests are not a problem anymore. We're just about done. We have one agency that is in the process of completing a 30-day late renewal, and that's not the only